Is this a paradigm shift in Legacy? When it comes to results data, it certainly is. We have a full month of results now that Daybreak has been publishing full data every single day. Let's look at last week in Legacy, starting with the league results. This dataset is larger than usual. It includes the January 29 to 31st results to complete the January data. Salty Beans put up the largest number of 5-0 results with 25 pilots, making it 12% of the results. The next largest decks were around half this number. Grixis Delver made up 6.25% of results, followed by Lands at 5.3%, Turbo Goblins and Mono Black Aggro each at 4.8%. Reanimator was less successful this week, while Rug Delver saw success alongside 8cast, all three decks coming in at 4.33% of the field. Demir's Scam fell off hard, down to 3.85% of the field, while Stiflenot grew to that same representation level. Tony's Capone's Jewel Artifact deck has become a true metagame contender, making up almost 3% of last week and the prior week's results. I also want to look at full results from the entire month of January. Turbo Goblins has exploded in popularity during and since December, and it is one of the top decks. It put up the largest quantity of league results, making up almost 9% of 5-0s overall. Grixis Delver was the second most successful deck in leagues, coming in at 7.33% of results. Salty Beans was right behind at 7% of results. Demir's Scam put up 6.25% of the 5-0s. Below that, we have Reanimator, Temur Rhinos, Lands, Doomsday, and Moonstompy, all making up between 3 and 4.5% of these results. Other notable breakouts include Paradigm Shift and Living End, each putting up around 1% of results. I'll link to gameplay videos from other creators on each of these decks because they're cool and relatively new. In addition to those, Mono Black Aggro has a new spin-off in the form of Rakdos Scam. This deck splashes red for Molten Collapse, Lightning Bolt, sometimes Fury, Broadside Bombardiers, and Fable of the Mirror Breaker. We have a much better view of the format of Legacy when looking at the data published for prelims and challenges. This is because we have access to all the deck lists from each event, so we can better draw conclusions here based on win rate, what converted, what didn't. As a quick review, we look at conversion rates to positive records and performance as a percentage of the difference between the expected and actual conversion rates for each deck. We had a total field in prelims and challenges of 1,274 decks. Of these decks, Reanimator was the most played deck. It made up 9.1% of the overall metagame, but it underperformed by roughly 6.5%. Turbo Goblins was the best deck this month, making up almost 9% of the field and overperforming by 10.5%. This deck is still relatively new on the scene, and it hasn't made its way to paper dominance yet. Turbo Goblins had truly impressive performance. Typically, we see the most played decks struggle with their win rates. This clearly wasn't the case here. Grixis Delver came in at 8.87% of the field, and it performed well, overperforming expectations by 6.25%. Demir's Scam has also come back from being a bottom deck during the 2023 Eternal Weekend events. It's also split into 3 to 4 distinct subcategories of Scam. The primary and traditional variant of this deck represented 6.5% of the field and overperformed by nearly 9.5%. This variant is a fair blue deck with the Grief Reanimate package, and it's often now playing Stalactite Stalker and sometimes Delver of Secrets as well. Other versions include a Rescaminator version playing Entomb, Animate Dead, Atroxa, and Archon of Cruelty. This is differentiated from Dimir Reanimator because it's playing 4 Wastelands and it doesn't have any fast mana, Lotus Petal, or Dark Ritual. Dimir Hogak Scam is also a spin-off of this deck. It plays 4 Hogak, 4 Stitcher Supplier, sometimes a Cabal Therapy. This allows it to attack on a different angle. Temur Rhinos represented almost 6.5% of the field and performed roughly 7% above parity. Next up, we have the Assorted Beans decks. This data and possibly the entirety of the format on Magic Online is being warped by the fact that Triumph of St. Catherine is not legal on Moto. It's also possible that Triumph is vastly overrated based on a very small number of paper performances. After the Eternal Weekend events in fall-winter of 2023, a widely held belief was that the Bant Splashing Black version of Beans, as played by TK Strawn, was the best deck in the format. That version of the deck played a lower-to-the-ground threat package in Orcish Bowmasters, Murktide Regent, and Triumph of St. Catherine. Salty Beans is the closest version of that deck that we see on Magic Online, essentially eschewing the Triumphs and White Removal for Witherbloom Command, Dazes, some number of Stifle, Spell Pierce, and Murderous Cut. This also makes room for a full playset of Wasteland. This Salty Beans deck made up 6.2% of the field and had a good few weeks paired with some bad weeks. Overall, it performed roughly at parity, or 0.1% above expected, but essentially at parity. The other Beans deck is a Bant-based 4 or 5 color deck, often playing the One Ring, Uro, 4th Ear Lingus. The 5C versions are typically the same as that, also splashing for Orcish Bowmasters. This category made up 4.3% of the field and underperformed by a significant 14.8%. Rounding out our metagame role players, Initiative was at 4.25%, performing at plus 13.9, 14%. Rug Delver and Lands were both just under 4%, 3.85. Each performed at plus 1.61%. Moonstompy was 3.5% of the field, overperforming by 4-ish%. Doomsday is roughly 3% of the field, but underperformed by negative 30% here. Let's look at some of the new decks and outliers from this month. Solid performers outside of the highly played decks were 12 Post, Cephalid Breakfast, Mystic Forge combo including Key and Ring decks, mostly colorless, and Rakdos Scam. These decks all overperformed by 25 to 40%. Decks that vastly overperformed were Paradigm Shift, Green-White X Depths, Mono-Black Aggro, Scam-ish stuff, Dimir Riskaminator. All of these decks overperformed by 50% plus. Our bottom performers were Sneak and Show, Painter, Dimir Death Shadow, Jewel Artifacts, Jeskai Control, Creative Technique, the 4-5C No Beans control decks, Dimir Hogak Scam, and Saga Storm. I'm putting together some results and archetype analysis per deck, but for now, here are some brief thoughts. If playing a red Ancient Tomb deck is in your range, it's my opinion that Turbo Goblins is the best deck in the format right now. It does require practice, format knowledge, and pretty flawless sequencing, but it may be on the easier end of decks that you can play in Legacy right now. After Eternal Weekend Pittsburgh, I was most concerned with the ability of this deck to beat fast combo, but I think now that those fears were maybe unfounded. Chalice of the Void and Thorn of Amethyst, plus a punishingly fast clock, are excellent tools to beat the spell-based combo decks. Grixis Delver is still doing great. Delver is basically never bad. It's probably the ideal deck for fair-minded blue mages. Some players are experimenting with Stalactite Stalker in place of Delver of Secrets, but it's still unclear which is better and in what context. Dimir Scam is competing in a similar space as Grixis Delver, but with a higher ceiling and a lower floor in my experience at least. It can have some bonker starts, but it does have a lower level of consistency and generally a worse Beans matchup. Sultai Beans was really good for the first couple of weeks, but it's fallen off a lot in the back half of the month. It's still the best Beans deck on Moto for sure, but it may not be the best positioned in this particular metagame, particularly in the Turbo Goblins matchup. With no nut draw and a combination of narrow answers, the deck plays on a razor's edge, with misplays having an outsized impact, so player skill is a pretty big factor in these results. Team of Rhinos is a little bit outside of my range, but it continues to be a contender. It's explosive and has lots of redundancy while being limited in the types of interaction it can run. This means that it doesn't have the same ability as some other decks when it comes to deck adjustments to combat the metagame, i.e. flex slots or various specific sideboard hate cards. Some of the decks I wouldn't play on Magic Online right now are the Bant-based Beans decks, Reanimator, and Sneak and Show. The format's fast. The Bant, Beans decks, and Sneak are both on the slower end and can struggle with fast pressure plus interaction, and Reanimator is fast and powerful, but it loses a lot of efficacy in post-board games when people bring in their sideboard cards. I think there are some decks to watch though. Initiative, 8-cast, Breakfast, Paradigm Shift, and the black-based Scam decks that are not Dimir are all pretty good, along with Green-White Depths, and even possibly Dimir Riskaminator, which is that Dimir Scam deck that plays Entomb Atraxa and some extra reanimate spells. Please let me know what you think of the format and of these results, and thanks for letting me share these findings with you.